the investment. We have a very great panelist today to discuss about these economic issues. So we try to look at the issues from a very wider perspective. And without further ado, I would like to invite the first panelist, Mr. Paulo Abner from the World Bank. So please.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And let me see if I can make this work. Yes, this works. Okay, so I'll just go one slide back. So I've got about 7 minutes, so it's impossible for me to be very comprehensive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically give a few pointers about the economics of disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction. And I wanted to start with a satellite imagery, and this is Cap Haïtien in Haiti, and it was taken in 2010. And I just wanted to show you this picture from 2021. And so, you know, one striking feature from the comparison between the two pictures here is that urbanization has happened in the riverbed, right? And so this has obvious consequences in terms of exposure of people and structures to flooding. A lot of the time, what we're seeing around the world is that people, especially fueled by rural-urban migration, people move to cities and they tend to settle where land has not been kind of used yet. And these places are either very far from the city centers and very far from the jobs, or they tend to be in risky areas, and this is exactly the case in Cap Haïtien here. But if we try to go beyond just that anecdotal evidence, you know, from the comparison between these two satellite images, and we try and be a bit more systematic, we can actually look from satellite imagery at urbanization at a global scale and how it has occurred over the last 30 years. So these charts are showing you growth rates of built-up areas over a 30-year period from 1985 to 2015, and it's classifying these by exposure to flood risk. And basically, the red curves that you're seeing in these charts are showing you the growth rates of built-up areas exposed to at least 50 centimeters of flooding in a 1-in-100-year flood event, or an up to 1.5 meters of flooding for the same type of flood event for the darkest red here. And so if we just look at the charts which focus on the middle-income countries to the left, what you're seeing is that urbanization in risky areas is massively outpacing urbanization in safe areas, right? We see a slightly different picture in low-income countries, but low-income country, the urbanization rate is still more nascent, so this is a good time to actually intervene and try to avoid the pattern of risky urban growth. And in high-income country, it's because a lot of the growth has actually already happened. So it's not saying that it's necessarily urban areas in high-income countries are safe, it just means that the additional urbanization has been safer. And this is basically the same idea, but if you put it on a map, right? So the red shades are showing you areas where risky growth is outpacing safe growth, and blue is showing the opposite. So basically, risk is gradually decreasing over time. And the picture basically is one of, you know, we're basically urbanizing in harm's way, right? That's one of the main messages. And I want to say, because it's often quite convenient to say, you know, climate change is increasing these episodes. And it is true, I'm not denying that at all, but we don't actually need, we're doing this even without climate change. We're actually urbanizing in harm's way. So one of the consequences and one of the pointers I wanted to talk about is the need for land use planning and incentives to actually move away from harm's way. The second dimension I wanted to talk about very briefly here is how do you prioritize disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction, or resilience building investments. And here you basically have two pictures of two projects that have to do with coastal protection. Project A, Project B, they cost about the same. The only difference between the two is that the Project A basically yields about 20 million avoided losses every year, whereas Project B yields about 5 million avoided losses every year. So I'm an economist, it's very simple maths. This is, cost-benefit analysis 101. What you want to do here is that you'll go with project A, right? Because it costs the same and it saves you more losses. But that's actually before you've done your field visit, right? So it could happen that once you actually go on the ground and you see that the project A is actually protecting very wealthy areas with lots of fancy cars, etc. Whereas project B would be protecting many more households, thousands of households, but they're living in very difficult conditions. And because they're much poorer, the collective asset is not that important, right? And so the fact that our cost-benefit analysis would favor financing project A for the World Bank, which focuses on poverty reduction, that's not a very satisfying outcome, right? So there's really this need to think about the distributional impacts of the projects that we're doing or that we're financing. And so I'm going to show you a few maps here. So this map is basically with a focus on the Philippines, and this is work by Stefan Algaz and Brian Walsh. It's showing you the asset losses when typhoons occur in Manila, basically, right? And based on this map, the areas that you will want to protect are probably the areas that are the worst impacted, so the areas that appear in blue. But we've just showed before that that's actually quite a biased metric because it's not taking into account who is being affected. So going one step forward, based on some work with household surveys that's processed through a model which is called the unbreakable model, we can actually start to get at who would fall into consumption poverty if the typhoon occurred, right? And here you start to see the areas which are the most affected, they start shifting a little bit, right? It's no longer only focused in Manila, it's also a bit outside of that point. But that's still a bit of a biased metric because it's only basically focusing on people which are just around the poverty line, so they could just fall under the poverty line in the case of a disaster or not. So we do want to go one step further. And we do that by looking at something that we call the well-being losses. It's quite technical, so I won't go into all the details, but basically what it's doing, it's taking the idea that a $10 loss for Bill Gates or Elon Musk doesn't mean the same thing for a slum dweller, for example, right? And Elon Musk probably doesn't even realize if he's lost a $10 note, whereas a slum dweller, it's the real difference between hardship and kind of subsistence living. So it's basically telling them that the poorest, the value of $1 for the poorest households is more important than it is for the richest household. And here, if you're looking at who the worst affected places or people would be, again, you start seeing a bit of a shift in the areas that you would want to protect, right? Manila is still appearing there, but it's slightly lighter red than the others, and the south is starting to become darker. And then there's another metric that we can use here, which is called the socioeconomic resilience, which is basically a division of the asset losses by the well-being losses. And it's really a metric for the ability to bounce back. So if you're losing your assets, you still have the ability to kind of recover from that quite easily. So the higher your socioeconomic resilience, the better off you are, the better equipped you are to kind of deal with the consequences of disasters. And here you see a completely different pattern, right? Here you'd probably be wanting to protect a lot of the south, which didn't appear in the previous maps. So I just want to maybe pause here and just saying that this idea of cost-benefit analysis that focus only on the dollar value of asset losses is a very partial metric, and you want to consider the distributional impacts of things that happen. Now, the other thing I did want to mention is we're not being prescriptive here. We're not saying that governments should choose one or the other. But what we do want to do is kind of bring this to their attention, right? Because the default is for governments to focus on asset losses. And maybe that's fine, but we want to kind of make sure through discussions, through running these exercises, that they're aware that they're missing a large part of the picture. Okay, and now and this is my final slide, the last kind of pointer I wanted to leave you with, and by no means have I been comprehensive or covered everything that we do or would like to do. I borrowed this slide from a report which is called the Triple Dividend of Resilience. And I wanted to mention that a lot of the time we think about disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction investments as a cost. And it is an investment. And that's really what I want to, and it's an investment that pays dividends. The first dividend that we're most aware of, and we always think, is that, well, actually, if you invest in disaster risk reduction, you're reducing your losses in terms of assets, you're limiting your fatalities and your injuries. But there are other dividends of resilience that come with it. Notably, the secondary dividend of resilience, they come from the reduction in the background risk, unleashing economic potential. And I know this sounds a bit abstract here, so let me take an example. If you're reducing floods in a city because you're improving drainage, etc., well, actually, the land which used to be frequently flooded, that land, its value is going to appreciate because now it makes more sense to build on it, right? The assets are not going to be destroyed every year or every 5 years. So that land value appreciation is one of the second dividend of the resilience. And then we have a third dividend of resilience, which can come in the form of recreational values and health co-benefits, for example. So just wanted to leave you with that, really trying to have in mind that if you want a full analysis of disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction, you really need to go beyond the avoided asset losses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo. I think it's a very interesting topic, like how to prioritize not just by economics, this social aspect, and also these three dividends. I think it's also would be nice to have like a quantitative methodologies. But maybe let's go to the next panelist, Mr. Lagham Pant from the Oxford University.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, honorary delegates, and it's an honor to speak in front of you in the UNESCO. So my name is Raghavat. I'm from the University of Oxford, and I'm going to talk about system of systems thinking that we develop in our university, in our group, to further the science and the methodologies in understanding some impacts of disasters. And what do I mean by that is looking at things beyond direct damages, something like that Pablo referred to. And we'll specifically look in the space of infrastructures like energy, water, waste, telecommunications. So, and these are all networked infrastructure. So what you see in the picture over here is that an infrastructure, it might have a localized impact due to a disaster, but that impact is not confined locally because it creates a propagating and cascading effect that affects disruptions to society and has further economic impacts. So what we try to do in our research, we develop models and tools to quantify vulnerabilities and risks to infrastructures and understand this direct plus indirect impacts of infrastructure failures, which we feel are not very well quantified and represented. And once we have this understanding of direct and indirect impacts, which we call systemic impacts, we try to look at how resilience interventions can be built into infrastructure networks. And if we are talking about kind of building interventions, we cannot intervene against every possible risk. So we have to think about prioritization of these interventions because after all, our capacities, our budgets are all limited. So what we do in our group is, and we have published a lot of work, I'm happy to share my work with colleagues who are interested. So we have built frameworks around a system of systems approach for quantifying spatial risks. And just to give you a summary picture of this framework, what is in this framework is data and models that we build and collect of infrastructure centered around the built environment. So there was a built environment session earlier, which talked about specific buildings. I think we see how infrastructures are connected to that built environment and is providing its services, and how people are also connected to all of this. So what you see, for example, in the pictorial representation over here, especially in the lines in red, is, for example, a propagation effect of an electricity infrastructure propagates through other kind of infrastructures, and we try to model all of that and how it affects buildings and people, and then how kind of we can also think of resilience interventions. we have published a number of papers on this. For example, the paper that you see at the very front of this actually also looked at, we're talking here about the Sendai frameworks, but all of these global frameworks, for example, SDG goals are also very, very well linked. Earlier in one of the sessions, there was a discussion about SDG 9 and 10, which kind of are linked to the built, 9 and 11 and 13 linked to the built environment. Our research showed that infrastructures are intrinsically linked to 72% of the targets and goals across all the SDGs. So they are everywhere. So just to kind of, in the interest of time, since I only have 6 minutes, a framework and action kind of how we've developed, and this is like one pictorial representation of our framework. And we have done a study in Vietnam, which I just want to share. So what we did is in this systems of systems framework, if you look at the panel at the very left, so we worked with people in Vietnam, and today in the morning there was a lot of discussion about hazard data and creating best-in-class hazard information. So we compile hazard information best-in-class for Vietnam globally or locally. And what we did is the panel in the upper in the middle, where we build these network models to map what you see in the red, that is the flows along the transport network connecting agriculture, in this case, to locations where there is demand and a supply for the product. So using this framework, what we are trying to understand is how an infrastructure is used. And then we are kind of subjecting, for example, hazards and combining them with infrastructure to quantify what Paolo spoke about, direct damages, but also then the systemic effects of those disruptions. And what you see of the three maps in the down is like our result of this analysis, where what we are saying is, once we have quantified risks, we can identify locations along, in this case, the road network. The roads that you see in dark are the ones which are the most affected by climate risks. The map which says benefits. Benefit is another word for essentially risks and avoided risks over here. So that's where the risks are concentrated. And when we put an adaptation intervention, those are the assets that we are trying to protect the most. And in the middle, what you see is the cost of those interventions. And what you see as the third map, which is the benefit cost ratios of adaptation interventions. And where you see the darker roads are the roads that we find we prioritize more from our analysis, we quantify. And we gave this kind of inference to the government of Vietnam to then understand kind of where to invest in adaptation prioritization. And not all of the roads will have a good case for investing. This is also one of the things that we have highlighted. And in that case, we need to understand the meaning of these interventions and the meaning of intervention, their benefit costs and what it means. And this kind of frameworks we have developed with the World Bank, not just in Vietnam, but in Argentina, using similar kind of methods and analysis. And again, kind of these reports have been produced for the governments in these countries and also with different organizations to give these kind of perspectives and these kind of first order screening maps, as we say, to identify at a national scale, where do you identify which infrastructure assets in your country are the most vulnerable and how do you quantify their systemic impacts and where are those systemic impacts located, and then how do you start thinking about adaptation and prioritization. Moving on, and this is my last slide in the interest of time. We are now working, and we have been working for a while with the government of Jamaica, and one of the next steps of this analysis is developing some web-based interface tools that we find stakeholders like a lot, instead of static maps, where they want to zoom in, interrogate their different assets, understand at the asset scale and how they zoom out at the country scale to identify risk and climate exposures, understand adaptation options. Nature-based solutions was discussed in the previous session. We are also looking at that with colleagues in Jamaica. And all of this work is being done with the University of West Indies in Jamaica, along with an institute called the Planning Institute of Jamaica, which sits in the Prime Minister's office. So we are kind of, a lot of this is data and knowledge that we're co-creating with stakeholders within country. And all of this work that we are doing essentially helps us kind of further the cause of, first of all, improving data assessment, improving data collection, and also kind of improving data collection for systemic risk assessment to help adaptation prioritization. So in the interest of time, I'll stop there. Thank you very much. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. I think if we have a lot of data, of course we need an assumption, but we can try to calculate very well. No? And I think one of the things I found interesting is that for the cost, I think it's not only the initial cost, maintenance or maintenance or life cycle cost we need to think about when we do this BYC. Thank you very much. So let's go to Ms. Pauline Georges from Expertise France. Thank you.
So thank you. It is truly a privilege to join this panel to discuss such important issues as economics of disaster risk reduction, together as experts, practitioners, decision makers who have both the responsibility and the opportunity to contribute to concrete and sustainable solutions. So, my name is Pauline Georges. Currently I've been working as technical coordinator for Expertise France in disaster risk reduction. So Expertise France is part of the group Agence Française de Développement. We are the French International Technical Cooperation Agency, and actually we design and implement technical assistance financed by several donors, such as, for example, Agence Française de Développement, but DG ECO or others. We are working on climate issues, biodiversity, sustainable development, democratic, economic and financial governance, health and human development, peace, stability and security, the department which I belong to. So actually we have a specific unit focused on disaster risk reduction, address both natural hazards and CBRN hazards. So I just would like to highlight some key facts on prevention and preparedness activities, just to highlight why it's very important to work on these topics. So climate change is significantly intensifying natural disasters, leading to substantial global economic impacts. In 2023 alone, this natural hazard resulted in $280 billion in losses. Climate-related events such as flood, storm, or wildfire are becoming more and more frequent and severe. According to the IPCC report number 6, extreme climate events that once occur every 50 years now happen 2 to 3 times more often. While no country is immune, developing nations suffer the most from natural hazards, taking on up to 80% of the human and economic losses. Is the reason that actually IPCC, UNDR, UNESCO, and other international organizations stress that effective prevention and preparedness approaches informed by scientific data are absolutely essential for minimizing long-term economic losses from natural hazards. And actually, according to the IPCC, every dollar spent on prevention can save up $7 to $9 in recovery and rebuilding. So I just would like to focus on several activities that we can provide in our technical assistance in prevention and preparedness. So I will not detail all this activity. I just would like to focus on risk matrix, early warning, and contingency plans. So concerning risk mapping, actually, so risk matrix is linked to the understanding of exposure, hazard, and vulnerability. We know that by 2050, 1.6 billion people will be living in areas at high risk of coastal and river flooding. However, the vulnerability varies based on different factors such as risk awareness, regulation, public policy, and individual capacity to respond to cope with, often shaped by gender, disability, and other factors. So it is very mandatory to understand this risk matrix in order to develop after a technical assistance based on this risk matrix. Early warning system. Actually, investing in climate monitoring and early warning system can dramatically reduce the impact of natural hazards. The World Meteorological Organization estimates that the system can mitigate disaster impacts by 30 to 60%, enabling quicker evacuation and more effective crisis management. Moreover, early warning system can prevent up to 75% of economic losses during a disaster. After, we are working a lot on preparedness activities. So based on all the activities you can see on prevention. So we are working on evacuation and emergency plan. For example, how to strengthen a local capacity to respond swiftly to extreme events. Because we know that countries with well-developed emergency plan can reduce disaster-related economic losses by up to 30%. So it's absolutely crucial to focus on how to enhance the capabilities of first responders, as well as communities, because we know that, for example, investing in their training, for example, for civil protection, can lower crisis management costs by 20 to 30%. So I would like to highlight some examples, actually. So it's some projects that we are developing around the world. So I would like to focus on the project in the Philippines called DREAL. So this project is to begin, a loan of 250 million was granted by IFD to the Philippines in order to strengthen disaster risk reduction at the local government level with the Department of the Interior and local government. Linked to this loan, a technical assistance designed and implemented by Expertise France based on the needs expressed by the beneficiaries is very important, has been developed in order to support the DILG in 4 components. So we are working on how to strengthen the DILG capacity to organize risk analysis and management training programs, how to support this institution in implementing a national and local capacity building strategy for disaster risk reduction and auditing mechanism, how to enhance local authorities' ability to effectively use disaster risk reduction and climate change-related funds, and to sum up, we would like to work on how to promote gender-responsive and socially inclusive approaches in local disaster efforts. So actually, the IPCC highlights some recommendations concerning economics of disaster risk reduction. In their report, they highlight that it's very important to work on how to anticipate and work on long-term planning, because taking early action is key to reducing the economic impact of natural disaster. Every dollar spent on prevention can save up to $7 to $9 in recovery and rebuilding, as I mentioned previously. It's crucial to work on how to develop financial tools. I know that, for example, the World Bank, JICA, have been working on the CADDO. For the French Development Agency, we are trying to develop a contingency loan. And actually, some dedicated granted to ongoing in order to address disaster risk reduction issues. It's very important to work on how to accelerate adaptation, because climate adaptation investment in developing countries are expected to reach $140 to $300 billion annually by 2030. And so increasing these efforts is vital to cope with rising climate risk. To finish, and actually it's linked to the previous panel, but it's mandatory to respect and to work with local knowledge. Successful efforts must consider indigenous and local knowledge and the socioeconomic and structural factor of each country. We don't have to impose our way of thinking, our standards, and we have to work from the ground to develop our technical assistance. So thank you once again for this invitation. It's a pleasure to have the privilege to present this technical assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Yeah, maybe we can come back later. Like you mentioned about this financial tools, maybe we can discuss how to finance the project, etc. But let's go to the next speaker, Mr. Kit Miyamoto from Miyamoto International.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see. So I'm going to talk about economics of a DRR and resiliency, an example from Turkey and the Philippines. So here's how we see as the resiliency means. So the horizontal axis is time, and the vertical axis is some indicators. Could be number of houses, could it be GNP, whatever that would be. So when event happens, everything drops. House is destroyed, road is destroyed, going down, that is what we call direct loss piece of it. Then there is a downtime. This is the response recovery phase. Sometimes it's really short, sometimes it's long. And there's a reconstruction started happening, and hopefully back to normal state. So if you can see this way, direct loss piece and recovery piece, if the area is less, it's higher resiliency. You know what I mean? So you want to make the DR to make work is either reduce the direct loss by the infrastructure resiliency or response structure. That's two ways to go about them. So Turkey's example. Now last year, February, it hit by magnitude 7.8 and 7.5 back to back. I mean, that's an incredible thing, and that's affected almost 300 kilometers long and 100 kilometers wide. It affected 40 million people, and it's no means small earthquake. If this same earthquake happens in Japan, a population center, or California, we're going to get destroyed, just like what happened in Turkey. Just no question. And so, yeah, it was one of the probably worst disaster sites I have ever visited, actually. So impact is 40 million people affected, destroyed about 35,000 mid-rise buildings in multiple seconds, and killed about 51,000 people, 100,000 people injured, and it's actually affected almost 500,000 building stocks. And they are usually 3 to 5 to 7, 8-story apartment buildings made of concrete. Think about this magnitude of this impact to this country. And almost 4 million people are displaced, and about $100 billion damage, just direct damage, not only considering a job loss, anything like that. This is a huge impact. So what happened here? Because Turkey has been investing DRR for many, many years. I mean, for example, I was a part of a World Bank team to embedded into the ISMAT program, that's the Istanbul program, to actually do a DR in Turkey and Istanbul and so on. And it was a very considered one of the most successful programs. Now, one thing is the Turkish building code changed in 1998. So anything built prior, so let's say 2000, right? Those buildings do not have no seismic considerations. So they are really dangerous. They're death boxes. You can see the same buildings in California, Japan, anywhere, actually, So yes, they are dangerous buildings. And I would say about half of the stocks are probably built in prior to that. However, no license system in the contractor, and also no inspection is required by the engineers for the privately owned buildings. And this is actually global norm. I see this everywhere. Every country I visit, generally speaking, inspection is not required by the engineers. Those are killer factors. Such a small thing, so by the way, if you think about it, with those killers. Why is that? Well, first of all, these are old buildings. Old buildings collapse. Just no question about it. California, we're going to see the same thing. And in LA, we expect to have about 7,000 buildings like that in this nature They're extremely dangerous. If magnitude 7.8, 7.5 happen to back, we're going to see the exact same in California. So this is I took picture of this chunk of concrete of a new construction. Little things missing it, little details. For example, the rebar is smooth, not deformed, we call, or the aggregate is essentially rocks in a concrete. Usually it should be pretty small, but it's got giant things in there. I don't think contractors save that much money doing that. And also, I noticed that some of the what we call hoop, which is if you got the pillar in a support in the floor, has a rebar inside, right? Steel. This tie element, so like a hoop. If that thing engaged, like point bent 135 like that, it's actually sustained that shake. If it's not, it pops. It's that simple, actually. So missing a little tiny details like that. So if there was an engineer on site, telling the contractors, okay, hook this in, don't use the big rocks, or just little things like that. Those buildings do not collapse, So people talk about the contractors cheating there's a fraud and all that stuff. I'm sure there's something like that did exist too, but that's not the main reason of killing 50,000 people. The killing 50,000 people come from an older stock of buildings and no inspection for new construction. Does this mean Turkish engineers are bad? No. Actually, Turkish engineers are considered to be one of the best in the world. They get the best education and there's a system of engineering is just building codes and everything, which is fine. And Turkey is only one country adapted the requirements that any hospitals, new construction built over the 100 beds have to have base isolation. Means essentially if you got a building, you got a ground, you put the air gap between the ground and building. That's what we call base isolation. We don't put an air gap, we just put rollers essentially. So every building's there, built new way for hospitals, has a base isolations. So look, this one here, it's actually you see that the building moving back and forth. That's what we call base isolation. So there are 12 hospitals like that in epicenter area. They're not only didn't get damaged, but they're actually occupied, be able to be in a normal hospital function. It's a functionality after this incredible earthquake. You see, technology exists, and engineers are great, even can take the 7.8, 7.5 back to back, And way that Turkey responded to this earthquake was amazing. I was there 2 days after, and there are about something like 100,000 the emergency response personnel was deployed on the field, and every little village, towns I visited, there is the urban search and rescue team, either from domestically or from internationally. And this is the effort provided. This tent is a warm tent, and this is again 2 days after. It's very organized. After all, the 4 million people lost homes, have to find a place to live. So they very organized tent format. They provide something like 50,000 tents or something like that in 2 days after. And all the infrastructures, all the viaduct, roads, airports, they're completely open after 2 days, actually. I was able to be reached anywhere, So those buildings perform really well. And they activate the private sector contractors be on the site right away. That's the ask from the government, and they reacted to that. And after 2 days, I saw this heavy equipment just taking away the dangerous buildings and debris. So assist the urban search and rescue team to be on it. That's incredible, actually. And also the engineers assessed about something like 100,000 to 200,000 buildings in the first 3 weeks for damage assessment. So I saw that every building has a QR code set up, so any residents can download what kind of damage that happened to it, So as far as the response is concerned, it was tremendous. So you can see that how fast they actually reacted to it. And by the 4th week, they're actually constructing new apartment buildings. I never seen anything like that, by the way, It was incredible. So Turkish do understand that reduction of response time is critical for resiliency. But what failed was the older stockpile buildings, private owned buildings, and also no inspection for privately owned buildings. But all the inspection done for the government owned buildings, healthcare, the schools and everything else performed really well. So let's back to the Manila example here. So here, Manila faces the same thing, you know. There's the West Valley Fault, which could rupture magnitude 7.5 any minute. And there's a school, about 3,000 to 4,000 schools, and there are dangerous buildings. What we call non-ductile concrete structures, which means that it's really brittle, little shake could collapse all those things, you know, and no control. And there's about 2 million students there. So we did the probabilistic risk assessment. We figured if the magnitude 7.5 rupture happened today, schools open could kill 24,000 students. And so we were working with the World Bank back in 2014, and their question is how much to fix this thing? About $2 billion. And the conversation stopped because no one has $2 billion to fix things like that. So they say, okay, find out what would be feasible to do this. So we're still looking at a little more details. So this is the building number 1 to building number 3,800, and the vertical axis shows the number of fatalities. So you can see that some school kill more than other schools. So concept here is that if you take out those bad apples, maybe we can reduce this fatality a lot. So it was. If you fix about 5% of a building stock, about 200 buildings, it cut down the fatality by about 6,000 to 7,000 students. Huge dent, right? Now, of course, if you can spend a lot more money, it'd be great. But key here is how much we can save it, because we got a limited amount of money. So this is back in 2014, and now the World Bank financed to actually start working on this so-called top 100, or worst 100 buildings. You know, this is one of the really great story. We cannot save all of it. We cannot do perfect things because it doesn't have that money like that exists. But you don't have to spend $100. Spending 50 cents make a huge impact. I think that's a lesson right here. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kit. I think we have several interesting implications, because for like investment, we really think about infrastructure, which costs a lot. But I think first part of the presentation is about more like changing people's behavior, how to construct in a nice way, then it will make a big difference. And also for the second part in Manila, yes, I think if you look at like a micro level, maybe you can also decrease the cost, because we always calculate in a macroeconomic level to calculate how much it will cost. But your example in the Manila, I think maybe we can also have some way to think about the cost for the benefit. Thank you very much. So let's go to the last speaker, Mr. Maha, first land in Ashram. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for the organizer for the opportunity to participate to this important event. This topic, the economics of TRR, is one of the favorite topics, let's say, as this is one of the topics we work on every day, all the year. So we have many things to say, but due to the interest of time, we have to choose let's say, the relevant topics. And based on the discussion we have with the organizer and the facilitator, I decided to choose 3 or 4 topics, and I hope you'll find it as so interesting, like as just like I saw it. So I will begin with the very basic things. Basic because I think everyone here knows it. Here in the room or remotely attending the conference. But I think also it's important in the sense that I would like to share with you some messages that, and these basic things are very important to guide the message I want to deliver, I want to share with you. So we all know the importance of these international agendas, these 4 international agendas, more precisely, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and the New Urban Agenda. Of course, if you look at the first, you will see the second one, many issues in the Paris Agreement, for example, are considered in the Sustainable Development Goals, and the urban agenda also capture many things interesting, important within the Sustainable Development Goals and the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, of course. And the Sendai framework, which is, I think, let's say, the base of this conference. We all know that, as discussed this morning, this silo approach, many countries, many governments are used to work before. Now we understand that this is not the best way to really choose and to move forward. So when we talk about the Sendai framework, I like to once again record the priorities, the understanding risk, of course, strengthening the governance of disaster risk, and also investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. These 3 priorities, we understand that these are related to disaster risk reduction. So at the international level, we understand that we now need to make the shift from disaster response to disaster risk investment. So this is very important for us to really understand that now we need to make efforts and focus more on disaster risk reduction efforts. And by disaster risk reduction efforts, we, of course, understand there is the investment aspect. And of course, the 4th priority of the Sendai framework talks about the concept of the Build Back Better. I call it the 3 Bs concept. And in this Build Back Better, we also can see that at the international level, based on the discussion we had in 2015, that even during the response phase, we also need to now consider the importance of contributing to the efforts of risk reduction, but not as we are used to, let's say, some decades ago, that when we are saving lives with the humanitarian activities, we did not really think about how to contribute to development efforts or disaster risk efforts, but we just used to think about how to save life as good as we can. But since the Sendai framework, we understand that even for this 4th priority, we also try to consider the importance of contributing to the efforts of disaster risk reduction. So this is the very first point I'd like to share with us. The first is then let's say the complementary approach, multidisciplinary approach, engaging every stakeholders, but also to think about how to contribute to the disaster risk reduction efforts. These are very important for us to understand. And then now these are some elements, let's say since 5 or 4 years now back. These are one of the things we can hear, you can see also when trying to read official reports or articles, scientific articles or something like that. We can see the nexus is now becoming something that we need to also to consider. So now I'd like to also develop with you these sustainable development goals with these 3 pillars, the social, economic, and the environmental pillars. Now we understand that these are, of course, very important, but these are not sufficient. We need also to consider the disaster risk as part of the efforts we need to also undertake. We need also to take into consideration, along with the standard 3 pillars of the Sustainable Development Goals. And then we also have, let's say, a new concept, which is, since this morning, the NBS, the nature-based solution. Here, I just put the nature, the ecology, which is, oops, it doesn't work. No. Oh, sorry, it doesn't work. Yeah, which is, I think, one of the things also we need to understand, because I previously talked about the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement invites us to be more more aware of the need of protecting the environment, and we talk, of course, about the importance of the nature-based solution. But what kind of solution, what kind of nature we need to really consider if we like to enhance the resilience of the community, if we think it's important to also contribute to the protection of the planet, of where we live. So we need, it is important to say, okay, nature-based solution, but we need to understand which solution we need to put in place, depending on the context, depending on the capacity we have, the capability. Of course, this is also something very important. Sometimes we do not necessarily think about giving the means, the capacity, of course, important, but also can we, is it sure if we give funds, if we support, let's say, the affected population with relief, with things that they would need, but at the same time, if we don't think about the capability, that means the knowledge they need to really and effectively use the capacity we provide with them, then the result would not be as high as we may expect. So it's also very important to think about the capability. So we then, in this cycle of disaster risk management, or the phase as we may call it, we need to not only think about this multidisciplinary approach, this multi-sectoral approach, but at the same time, we need to think on how to best invest. The investment is something very important. If you listen to this morning presentations and also some part of this afternoon presentation, people used to say, okay, if we invest $1, but in disaster risk reduction, it may save $5 in response. But it's not sure. It could be 3, it could be 15. It depends really on how we invest, where to invest, and how we invest. So this is something very, very important. So the one point very important I'd like to share, and this is for member states having this role to convince the national authorities to say, okay, we need to invest. We need to invest for what? For the resilience of our community, yes. To also protect the environment of the country so that we also contribute to the global efforts on that, yes. But we need to take into consideration the risk. This is what I called here the risk-informed development. This is very important, the risk-informed development, considering at the same time the nature, the natural resources we have. We need to consider are these resources. We have to really invest as it should be and expect and maximize the result we may expect from the investment we would be doing. And one last point, how to engage with the local community, because this is also something very important. When we talk about disaster risk reduction, the economics of the IRR or disaster economics, we used to look at the macro level. But what about the community? This is also something we need to think about. And I can share a very, let's say, what we call the innovative tool to involve and to engage with the local community, which is the concept of 4 Ps. We are used to the concept, to the 3 Ps concept, the private, public-private partnership. But we now should think about the 4 Ps, population, public, private partnership. This is very important because, you know, the means, the fund we may receive from outside the country, especially for developing countries who are very dependent on external fundings. The community, the local authorities do not always have and do not always receive part of this funding, but they need also to invest on disaster risk reduction. So we need to take into consideration how we can engage with them. It might be the local policy, local fiscal policy. We can have many, let's say, innovative tools like that that could be very helpful for local authorities and local community to also engage and take the responsibility to improve the risk reduction efforts in these local communities. So these are some ideas I'd like to share. Of course, due to interest of time, I cannot develop it as I intend, but I am very happy to respond to the question if you have some related to these, let's say, basic ideas. Yeah, thank you for listening to me, and I hope to be able to respond to the question. I hope you will have some questions, and I hope to be able to share with you more of the inputs I may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mafefas. I think you covered a lot of things, but I think one of the few things I noticed is that I think investment, we tend to think about the infrastructure, but you mentioned about the capacity building or nature-based solution. These are different assets, like a nature-based solution, you can use it for recreations or like a climate education, etc. So I think Paolo mentioned about the dividend. I think this is more like a economic dividend, but I think more like a social dividend. I think we can also think about, or we can use it to convince policymakers to fund on the preventions. So we are actually running time, but maybe we can call for questions, and I see Brazil, so please.
Well, thank you very much. Again, thank you for the panelists for the very enriching views that were shared here. And well, we learned in this session that that considerations about investments in projects for reducing disaster risk have to go beyond metrics related to the financial losses being avoided. We learned also that there's been a disproportionate impact for developing countries, and that poor countries bear 80% of the consequences of disasters. So based on that, I would like to explore another economic aspect of disaster risk reduction. It is reasonable to think that to imagine that let's say informal settlements in poorer countries with poorer communities are more affected, not only because they lack resilient infrastructure, but because they lack infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure for proper housing, infrastructure for sanitation, etc., etc. So my question is, do we have data showing how fighting poverty and inequality help to reduce vulnerability of these countries and communities? And do we have data showing how access to education help to reduce vulnerability? If not, isn't it the time to work on that? Because I'm asking that because we heard a lot about nature-based solutions, which is great, amazing, but I lack a bit something about fighting poverty-based solutions. And well, this is my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, Tom? Yeah.
If I may add to that, my question was very similar. Sendai was 10 years ago, and to me, they asked the question like about science, what happened in 10 years in science. And now the question here, in 10 years, we have invested a lot in prevention. Several of you have presented the number of millions and billions that are invested also from the European Union. Is it this number times 7 that are the losses that have been prevented? Do we have an idea of the big picture of how much risk we have prevented? And is somebody looking at that? That's a bit the question there, because that's it could be a very strong argument to see how good we are doing.
Well, maybe I want to talk about what happened in Haiti. So 2010 earthquake happened, right? And it killed about 300,000 people. And we are involved pretty deeply. And our company alone, we probably trained like 7,000 masons and set up guidelines and change the trade school, the curriculums and so on. And so times whatever companies there train, tens of thousands of people. Now today, if you go jungle in Haiti, you're going to see school construction. Those masons using the latest technique from ACI 318 for the reinforcement, you know? And I asked the mason, I asked him actually, I was there like a year ago, how'd you learn this thing, you know? Were you at the part of my training class or something, maybe? He said, no, I don't know you. This is a norm. Norm today, and hey, you know, I learned this from our trade school. So it's, you know, education, the capacity building, training, those things are so critical. So yeah, Haiti, many things doesn't go so well, but as far as the resiliency, how people build today, it's become like a norm, actually, you know, in the Port-au-Prince area, in the West Department for sure. So education matters, training matters.
Is this, yes, okay. I wanted to maybe say a few words about this question of poverty, basically, and poverty and disaster risk management, or disaster risk reduction. So we know that poverty is probably the main driver of the impact to people. And this happens through different channels. The first one is just because in many places where we have looked, the poorest are actually those which are the most exposed. So if we're thinking of urbanization, the poorest, the newcomers to the city, often the poorest, tend to settle not only in informal settlements, but also those informal settlements tend to be in areas which are exposed to a variety of disasters, including floods. So that's one of the main channels. The second one is that when the disaster actually happens, they have a lower ability to cope. And it's really this idea. So because the savings are lower, so what happens is whatever assets they have to either sell or lend. And that means that they have a loss of income during that period. That loss of income, it has a multitude of consequences. Can be compensated by skipping meals, which is probably okay for an adult, but we know it leads to child stunting for children who are lower, and that kind of obscures the development gains of that child for, you know, basically his entire life then. We also know that it can come in the form of people or children not going to school. And we know that when that happens, the probability of that being these kids never going back to school is very high. It's about 50%. So we know, and all this is tied to the fact that you don't have the savings to cope with the disaster, and you have to cope in different ways. That has been studied through a number of what we call disaster and poverty household surveys. We've got example of those in Dar es Salaam, in Haiti. We've got examples of those in Ghana, for example, and there's about 20 of those surveys around the world. So this idea that poverty and adaptation or disaster risk management are the two faces of the same coin, right? You cannot have development if you're not addressing the basic conditions, which is safety from disasters or the ability to cope with them. And similarly, the other way happens, right? If you're not dealing with those disasters, then you know that a lot of people are going to be falling under the poverty line very quickly. And that has been, I can point you to a study from the World Bank called Shock Waves that actually kind of studies the two sides of that same coin.
Can I say something about data? Sorry. Yeah, regarding data, I mean, one of the things is like sometimes there is data out there, but people don't know how to use that data for disaster risk resilience. For example, we worked in Jamaica, we worked in Bangladesh, and they have like these spatial data on socioeconomic indicators, or even simple thing as population data by age and distribution and so on and so forth. And those will be collected by people in the Ministry of like the statistics, but they don't use it for disaster risk resilience. So many times there are data sets out there that actually are not used, but that information is collated by other agencies for other purposes. And sometimes what happens is, it's essentially, that's what in the kind of work that we do, we try to bring, along with the models we are developing, we try to bring organizations together as well to explore what are the common data sets that can be used. So yeah, there is data out there, but of course there's a lots of data gaps, but it's how they are used for different purposes is also very important. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Actually, we have a contract with a translator, so we need to finish in, I think 7. So we have a Lydia for the closing remarks. So try to be concise in your response. No, but please.
Yes, thank you, Soshiro. Yeah, I'd like to also speak about the data. Of course, like it has been said, we have data, especially related to poverty, related to socio-economic conditions. But this data, as it was said, still needs some more details, let's say, to really understand, for example, the risk factors, the risk drivers behind, because saying these people is poor is not enough for us to really understand the risk related to that kind of poverty. So this is one of the efforts we still need at the country level, and have really the risk atlas. And here I'd like to add that the risk atlas we are used to see is very important, but if we can have the economic risk atlas, which is showing the importance, economically speaking, of this risk, this could be a very good decision-making tools available for the decision makers. Thank you.
Thank you. I just learned that we can be here until 6:15, so you can make a little bit longer intervention. If not, do you have any other questions? Yes, please.
My name's Stephen Swaby. I'm a consultant with the AECOM company and a member of the World Commission on Protected Areas. My question relates to the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So there's, in civil society, an increasing adoption of the TCFD and similar standards, which is likely to increase the use by commercial and business enterprises of adaptation, particularly to the physical impacts of climate change. That also relates to disaster risk, which exacerbates climate change. Can the panel discuss whether and how things like the TCFD and other standards may assist the Sendai framework to drive future adaptation and reduce disaster risk in the future?
Thank you very much. But what is GC? I couldn't get it. I couldn't catch it.
Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It's the requirement for businesses and enterprises to consider the impacts of climate change on their operations, and as part of their environmental and social governance, they're expected to improve their response to physical impacts of climate change. And I'd anticipate that would drive a reduction in exposure and increase resilience. How does that relate to the Sendai framework?
Thanks for the question. I'm not an expert on this topic, but I'm very much aware of TCFD. And yeah, of course, in principle, what TCFD is trying to do, where private organizations will report their climate exposures and kind of see how they are kind of accounting them in their financing. In principle, it is something that should be definitely part of the principles of Sendai as well, because one of the big discussions that's missing over here is essentially private organizations, because we always talk about disaster risk resilience in the context of countries, nation states, and how governments can invest, but lots of, at least in infrastructures where I work, lots of infrastructures owned and operated by private companies, so there's a lot of kind of interest in how they report. One of the things with TCFD is that there's a lot of high-level reporting in TCFD, and lots of that high-level reporting I mean, because I've worked with some of the TCFD metrics and frameworks and everything, I feel some of them are very crude. There's a very kind of red, green, blue kind of indicators and saying like, oh, red means high risk, but kind of not looking into granularities and kind of impacts of those risks beyond the assets and of these owners and operators of these private entities, infrastructures and so on and so forth. So there is a scope to kind of bring that in a more kind of open way into the discussion into the DRR, because at present, a lot of this, there's some good principles out there, I feel, but the way it is done is, there's a gap in terms of that information being a bit too crude and also not kind of informing much about how that will enable decision making and investment at a very kind of, which is what we are talking about here, at a more granular scale, and having a local impact, but also having a global benefit as well.
If I may, I can make like a general comment about this GCFD. No, it's related to a Sendai framework, because one of the priority 3 is about investment not only by the public but also the private sectors. And I think it was also a discussion in the previous session too for the resilient built environment, because I think some of the assets are public owned, but most of them are private owned. And I think the business, business need to protect their businesses in case of disasters, not only like a financial crisis, other than that, but we can also think about this natural hazard. And I think there are several standards already, about this business continuity plan for the private sectors. And I think it's really related not only the financial crisis, cyber attack, but also natural hazard. So, wait, I have some question from online. Okay, no, I think the question is not really related to the economics. So I think we can close this session, and thank you very much for the panelists for the interesting conversation. And I think we didn't have enough time, so if you wish, we can continue after you go back to your house, after you go back to your home, because next year we are going to have a global platform for DRR organized by UNDRR. And I think one of the sessions is about finance. And I talked to Abhilash from UNDRR that we want to bring our discussion to the next year's conference. And that's why we want to be clear what kind of message you want to bring to the next year. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for the participants till 6 p.m. I really appreciate your interest and participation. Thank you very much. And before closing, I would like to invite Lydia, our Assistant Director General for the Natural Sciences sector, for the closing remark, please.
Good afternoon. I feel really guilty because I think it would have been more important for the panel to continue interacting with you than really my closing remarks. It's difficult to try to capture the richness of the presentations, of the reflection, and I would say also of the hope and the willing to work together that happened today. I want to thank also the translators. Thank you very much for giving us some more minutes. So, Excellencies, distinguished guests, distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, as we conclude this inspiring and thoughtful conference, I would like to thank each of you for your active participation, including the participants online, and the dedication and the variety of knowledge shared throughout these sessions. Over the past decade, the Sendai framework has guided our collective efforts in disaster risk reduction, and this conference has reaffirmed our commitment to envisioning the road ahead with clear focus on building resilience and fostering sustainable development. In session one, this session reminded us the power of innovation. We acknowledge the challenges faced, but also emphasize the critical importance of uniting diverse stakeholders. Capacity building plays a pivotal role in this equation, and we know the immense value that science brings to the table, whether in prediction, analysis, or understanding the uncertainties that lies ahead. But the real challenge lies in translating this scientific knowledge into actionable practices and policies, and this last panel mentioned also this challenge. So this is the work that remains ahead of us. Equally important is how we communicate these scientific advancements. How do we involve local communities in creating these advancements? How do we involve our communities and learn from them? We need to speak in a language that empowers people, that includes people, showing not only the challenges, but the solutions that science and local knowledge can offer. It is time to shift away from really this depression, because every time we see a disaster, we get very depressed, and focus really to say, what can we do better? And how can we prevent? How can we mitigate? How can we together really make sure that these disasters can also bring changes that are so important for sustainable development? In session two, the discussion have highlighted the critical role of a resilience-built environment in achieving broader societal resilience, with clear connections between the Sendai framework and the Sustainable Development Goals. We have discussed the progress since the Sendai conference in built environments, from the innovative use of advanced technologies to assess school infrastructure resilience, to the strategic importance of policies and financing in safeguarding the built environment, and the vital role of cultural preservation and vernacular construction in disaster risk reduction. We have explored a wide range of perspectives that enrich our understanding of resilience. As we have seen, resilience must be approached holistically, integrating science, policy, local knowledge, and collaborative efforts across sectors. The network of experts and stakeholders will play a pivotal role in advancing this collaboration, and today's session has certainly laid the groundwork for continued dialogue and action. Session 3 opened our eyes to the invaluable interlinkages between culture, natural-based solutions, local indigenous knowledge systems, which are essential pillars for building resilient communities. We explore how heritage and traditional knowledge passed down through generations offer time-tested practices that mitigate disaster risks while promoting environmental stewardship. This session highlighted how these elements work hand in hand with modern science and technology, and particularly in vulnerable regions such as small island development states, that where both traditional and innovative approach are vital if we want to find the right solutions. Panelists emphasized the importance of integrating nature-based solutions into disaster risk reduction strategies, aligning with the growing global recognition of their benefits. Furthermore, the role of international cooperation for promotion of multi-sectoral dialogue was underscored, emphasizing how culture and nature are not separate entities, but interconnected drivers of resilience. As we continue in this path, the convergence of these strategies will empower communities to face future challenges with strength and sustainability. In session 4, we dove into the economics of disaster risk reduction underscoring the need for sound financial strategies that prioritize risk-informed investments. We learned that resilience is not just a social and environmental goal, but an economical imperative. Investing in disaster preparedness today will save lives, livelihoods, and costs tomorrow, providing a solid foundation for long-term growth and stability. This session also discussed the issues related to governance and the importance of partnerships and innovative partnerships that bring not only public and private entities, but also the local communities. I want also to thank the Brazilian delegate for raising this important connection between poverty and vulnerability to disasters. And I think there is a lot to do and to work in these metrics to really make that case even stronger, because we know that the poor people are the most vulnerable people. And so we just need to push that message more and more, and I thank Brazil and through the G20 in disaster risk reduction, that message is strongly spoken by His Excellency the President Lula. As we look forward, the road ahead is undoubtedly complex, but is also filled with hope and opportunity. The collaborations forged here, I hope, the knowledge exchanged, and the innovative ideas discussed will shape the next phase of our journey. In closing, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to our panelists and participants for their contributions. I am confident that the momentum we have built will drive us towards a future where resilience, sustainability, and inclusivity guide our actions in disaster risk reduction. Together, we can build a world that not only experiences disasters, but that can use disasters to build better, to build a world that is more peaceful, more inclusive, more equal, and more just. I thank you all for all your support, and to our translators, thank you for giving me these extra minutes. Thank you.